Today on A Thinking Muslim, I want to explore a difficult and uncomfortable question with my guest, Marwan Muhammad. Have Muslims in France reached a point where if they have the means, Hijrah becomes the only serious option left? That may sound dramatic and perhaps like a victory for those who want Muslims pushed out of public life. But for many committed Muslims in France, France now appears to be a country where practicing Islam openly, confidently, and as a community has become increasingly difficult. Marwan Muhammad, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to The Thinking Muslim.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. What a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, it's lovely to have you with us, Marwan. Now, you're a human rights activist, a statistician. You're someone who's really intimately, you know about the situation of Muslims in France. And in my introduction, I suggested that life has become unbearable for Muslims in the country. Now, as someone who's interested in civil liberties and interested in the way the French state operates, can you take your time to explain in concrete terms what the French state has done to restrict Muslim life in the country?
Yes. So obviously this has been a continuous process. There has been a number of laws that have been passed. 2004, the hijab ban. 2010, the niqab ban. 2015, after the terrorist attacks in France, the state of emergency, which had a disproportionate effect on Muslim communities. Thousands of innocent Muslim families being raided. Then after that, 2020, the new law on separatism. 2023, the ban on abaya in public schools. So there is a continuum of laws targeting Muslims directly or indirectly. And then there are a number of political discourses, administrative measures that target specifically Muslims in schools, in public spaces, in hospitals, in social services, which means that the state of France has a direct action in this, a direct hand in this. And the political discourses and the general media atmospheres makes these discourses spread into the wider society. And now every racist in the country feel authorized to go after a Muslim woman, a Muslim kid, a Muslim elderly person, insult them in the street, assault them sometimes in the street, target masajids and Muslim schools across the country, which creates an objective situation of oppression and discrimination and a subjective atmosphere in the general public conversation in France that Muslims, whoever they are, however they are a problem. This combination of objective oppression and subjective political discursive framing contributes to a Muslim experience that is oppressive and that is a second-tier type of citizen experience.
And let's paint me a picture of a life of the ordinary life of a Muslim. What would a Muslim in France expect from waking up in the morning to going to sleep at night?
Yeah, so any racialized community, any one of our listeners will understand this. When we grow up with this, we cope with it. We build coping strategies to the point where it becomes simply an information. When we were in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we knew that for being Asian, Black, or Arab, we would be targeted by the police for controls or ID checks or anything like this, to the point where it became a normal thing. For Muslims today, the religious marker is going to be the one they interiorize the most and for which they expect to be discriminated because they are indeed discriminated against. So job search is going to be an issue. You know that you are not going to have the same opportunity. You get 3 times less opportunities for an interview just based on your name, sometimes more than that. You know that for being Arab, you are going to be stopped by the police 8 times more often than the average citizen. You know that when looking for a flat, you are going to be discriminated against before even getting a visit to the apartment. And if you get to the visit for the apartment, you will never get that apartment. So housing opportunity, job opportunity, public opportunities, Muslim journalists, Muslim academics, Muslim politicians will be directly targeted by their names, accused of being a double agent, having a hidden agenda. And in everyday Muslim life, at work, you need to anticipate that you cannot have a critical opinion, because if a random citizen publishes or says something critical about the government, that's normal being French. But if a Muslim does it, then there are supposedly ulterior motives to it. So we interiorize this a lot. You also see it in everyday life terms that are completely normal, like Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, passing salam, the saying Bismillah or Allahu Akbar, now have a connotation where you have to justify yourself if you use them. Obviously, sisters will have a deliberate focus and a different experience, because for wearing the hijab or not wearing the hijab, they will have to anticipate a number of discrimination situations. If they wear the hijab, they will be discriminated at the entrance or in accessing something. If they do not wear the hijab, they will be under suspicion. They have to prove, they have to justify that they are not one of them, that they are indeed a good French citizen. So this combination shows that you have objective situations of discrimination in accessing a restaurant, a gym, a swimming pool, a school, a specific training or a job opportunity. And then you have micro incidents of the everyday life, either on social networks or in the street or in your coffee table conversation at the office or at the water cooler, where you have to anticipate and interiorize the fact that your religiosity, when expressed, will be a minus point in the way you reflect in the professional workspace or in public space or in the media where you work or in any social setup, really.
Separatism, that was a law that was passed a few years ago. What did the French state mean by separatism?
Yeah, so there is a whole body of comedy research now that is available to try and make sense of French Islamophobic conceptualization. So there has been, over the past 20 to 30 years, an immense number of new concepts that are developed just to construct Muslims as a problem. Yeah. So it was starting with Islamism, then radicalism, and then the Muslim Brotherhood, and then separatism. Now we came to the word of Entrism. And no matter what Muslims do or say, there will be an inflation of concepts targeting them. These concepts, they are never defined. There is no normative definition of Islamism. There is no normative definition of extremism. There is no normative definition of separatism or entryism. But whatever Muslims do, we will come up with a way of problematizing it. So if Muslims stay on their own or do Muslim stuff, they build a mosque or they have a community center or they celebrate their Islamic culture, then we say, hey, this is communitarism, they stay among themselves. If they try and be part of society, we say that they are infiltrating, they are pretending to be citizens, but really they want to take over. They want to take over the city hall. They want to take over the French soccer team. They want to take over the hospital or the school or the rap game or whatever they want to be part of. They're trying to take over. So that's entryism. And if, because they are tired or they don't want to try and they say, hey, I'm done with this, I'm just going to stay on my own, leave me in peace, then this becomes separatism. So there is this clinical analysis that you could do that actually human rights are of no use for this. Civil liberties are of no use for this. What you need to do is look at psychiatry maybe to provide some level of care. Say, hey, what's the deal? If we are conversational with French values, you accuse us of having a double standard or a hidden motive. If we stay in our community center, then you accuse us of something. At some point, we're going to believe that you actually have an issue with us and not with what we do or what we say. The last point I wanted to make on this is that Muslims have been navigating this space and playing with this, because when the rule of law is no longer of use to protect your fundamental freedoms, when rational or academic debate is not respected because we couldn't care less about the actual truth of what Muslims do, then comedy is a last resource to some extent. Right. So you see a whole new scene of comedians, stand-up artists, taking these stereotypes, debunking them, and this seems to be the best response at the current moment, at least the most effective in the current state of the conversation.
Right, almost like a gallows humor, whatever they do we're just going to laugh at them now. There was a report that was released, a so-called report that suggested that Muslims are involved in Entrism, and I think that they suggested that the Muslim Brotherhood has occupied different places of power across the country, and it gained some traction in France. So I explain what happened there.
Yeah, so there has been this idea that like the Muslim Brotherhood is like a key movement in France. Spoiler, it is not. Like to my knowledge, there are only like a few thousands that are not even affiliated, were part of organizations that have part of their values inspired from the Egyptian original Muslim Brotherhood. But this is completely irrelevant in the framing that is currently active in France. Because when you look at, if you do not have a definition, then you look at the uses of the concept of Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
And you see that it can target like anyone. There was a comedian on national radio. He had a beard and he had his hair covered with a hat. So that's the Muslim Brotherhood infiltrating public radio in France. There was a Muslim singer. She was part of a competition, but at the time she had a turban or a hijab. So that's the Muslim Brotherhood infiltrating culture and art in France. If there is an academic that dares criticize police violence in France, or speak on the genocide in Palestine, or speak about racism and or Islamophobia in France, then this is the infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood in academia. It went to a point where even the Minister of Higher Education in France commissioned a formal investigation into entryism of Muslim Brotherhood and Islamo-leftism in French academia. Of course, this went nowhere. This was a sham. This was completely ridiculous. But it gives you a picture of, hey, we couldn't care less about the actual truth. We're going to name Muslim Brother or Salafi or Islamist or Radical Islam, essentially any Muslim that disagrees. And so, like, when you look at the concept of entryism today, essentially what they're saying is, we brought these Africans and these North Africans and like these Asians people to work for us at the time of the end of the colonies. They were supposed to clean our streets, pick up the garbage, build our houses and highways. But now they have degrees and they're coming for our jobs and they're supposed to be part of the society that was supposed to dominate them. Like, we'll never accept this. So whatever concept we can use against them, racialists, Islamists, or in this case, entryists or separatists, it's going to be like a tactics that is used and played to exclude people from positions of visibility, power, or in our case, simple civic participation.
Marwan, can you paint a picture of just French Muslims, who they are, their background, their socioeconomic sort of conditions? I mean, you're a statistician, and I'm sure you've done a lot of work into, I know there's no census data that pinpoints just the number of Muslims in the country, but there must be other data sets that explain who they are.
Of course. So there is a lower estimate that is based on self-identification as Muslim, and this estimate on the lower range is around 6 million Muslims.
That's 10% of the population?
That's 10% of the population. Higher estimate tend to position it around like 8 to 9. Among these, a large number of Muslims are involved religiously. So Ramadan is a normal feature of their practice. 5 salawat a day is a normal feature of their practice. And then Muslims like caring about zakat, and they're like implementing some key measures of the Islamic faith. And then the demographics of this is 70% North African, 10% Sub-Saharan African, 10% converts, and 10% from the rest of the world. That's Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, and other countries. So this means that essentially Islam in France, Muslims in France, have this post-colonial history as a central paradigm in their relationship with France, essentially. And then socially and economically, they are extremely diversified. They are in every part of the French society, which speaks to the logic of like infiltration, and like they're just like every normal citizen, high level of social interaction with their neighbors, their co-workers, their friends. They are like extremely well represented in sports, in art, in economics, in leadership position in some companies. And you always see this at the beginning of a diaspora. So first, second, third generation, there's this notion, this double notion that our parents left poverty. And second, because of this, we have a lot of catch up to do. So we seek positions or degrees that are going to keep our family safe from poverty. So always you'll notice this, no matter the faith or the origin of the community, that like first, second, third generation have a lot of economic catching up to do, which explains why there is a high mobility, high social and economic mobility in some components of the Muslim community, because they seek and work extremely hard to keep their family safe. That's the current situation. And then politically, they were massively on the left side of the political spectrum for social and economic reasons that are transversal to any community. And now they have a lot of mobility to the center and to the center right. And this is outside of the Islamophobic markers, I would say. They tend to care about other values and not only about like social progress and economic progress.
Now, Marwan, inevitably we're going to have comments on this show from French people, from Europeans who say, well, there's no smoke without fire. French Muslims have been involved in the past in acts of extremism, maybe even acts of terrorism. And so it then means that the French state has to see the Muslim community as a problem. Like, how would you respond to that?
Of course, but the opposite of Muslims are dangerous is that Muslims are kind, is that Muslims are normal. So there is, among Muslims, good and bad people. There is a level of criminality. There is a level of social participation or contribution to humanitarian work or to academia, like any other community. The problem is, how is their race, their social, their ethnic or cultural background, or in that case, their faith, an explanatory factor in the criminal behavior? When you have a terrorist attack or a high level of criminality, you focus on the key factors, the preparation of the attacks, the criminal connections before that. And so these have an explanatory power. How is their skin color an explanatory power? How is their faith a key factor in that? So the focus on their faith, unless it was like a clear motive they expressed, blinds the criminal analysis and creates a racial construct that builds Islamophobia as a security concern. But security doesn't have to focus on faith. And by the way, France, the UK, Germany, most of Western countries have signed a number of security agreements, human rights agreements, political declarations that say and recognizes that conflating criminality with any ethnic, cultural, or religious factor is racism, is discriminatory. Yeah. So like there is this legal basis. It doesn't help, second thing, it doesn't help the analysis. Third, this is plain racist, and this helps nothing in terms of security.
Yeah. And the hijab, I mean, of course, for a long time, the hijab has become synonymous with this sort of animus that the French state applies to the Muslim community. Why is the hijab? Why is the woman in particular, Muslim women in particular, why are they so fascinated by that?
Yeah, so this one is a more complex one, and there are like multiple factors contributing to it. The main one is there is sexism in France, and so Islamophobia has like an intersectional nature in the fact that these are Muslim women, but before even being Muslim, they are women. Yeah. So they will not get the same opportunities. They will not get the same rights in any setup. We just use their religion in this context as a construction of a problem, as an excuse to exclude them from the competing pool for a job. We could use different markers. We could use their ethnicity in a different context. But Islamophobia is so potent that it provides racism without the guilt that comes with it. So excluding someone because of their faith or their religious visibility is the easiest shortcut tactic to be used to get rid of someone. And women, because they are visible when they wear the hijab, are going to be targeted for this reason. Yeah. Second, and this has been a constant over the last few years, there is even a pervert obsession for North African and Black women who make up a lot of the Muslim community in France. This dates back to colonial times. The displays of naked North African and Arab women and sub-Saharan African women as markers of sexual items targeted by French colonial settlers at the time. This has been a constant, and this is very much still present in different milder forms in public culture and in public discourse. This remains one of the top queries on porn websites in France.
Really?
So there is this obsession for women. And then there's something specific to Muslim women in France. They have been overinvested in the 80s with the idea that they would be vectors through which we will influence their families. Right. So there was a lot of investment on Muslim young female in the 80s to access studies, to access grants, to be given opportunities, with the hope that the closer they are to us from the position of the elites, the further away they will be from their faith, their family, their origins, their initial culture. And once they adhere to our ethos and our ideology, they will convey this into their own families. Right. And this didn't happen as planned. These sisters, they've studied. They were like torchbearers among their families and among their siblings. They were working so hard and achieving so much success. They killed it at school. They killed it in the social setup. They built organizations. They were involved in humanitarian work. They built cultural projects. They were like really backbones of communities locally. And even when they had social and economic mobility, they never left their family and they never left their faith. And by virtue of French rationality and the education that they got, they redefined on their own terms what it meant for them individually to be a French Muslim at the time. And this was seen as like an ingracious position. We did everything for you, and you became even more religious. We gave you opportunity to separate from your family and your faith, and you became even closer to that. We will never forgive this. And so sisters who are involved, and I insist, hijabi and non-hijabi, in positions of leadership, academic, religious, economic, artistic, or otherwise, will always be a target for being women, for being Muslims, and for taking the French promise quite literally that they would be equal citizens to the others on their own terms.
This is Ghana, Dodowa Asebi to be precise. Initially, we didn't have water, but now we have water thanks to Baitul Mal. Alhamdulillah, thank you so much.
Baitul Mal, thank you very much. First, we don't get water to drink. Now we get fine water. Thank you. God bless you all.
Please visit btml.us/thinkingmuslim to donate now. Can you just explain, what is the restriction at the moment on women who wear hijab and abaya and niqab? Let's explain where they can't wear these things.
So anything that is like public service, as a professional, you cannot access if you wear a hijab. So you cannot work as a civil servant, you cannot be a teacher, wow. You cannot be a nurse in a public hospital. Officially, that's the rule. Any position that represents the state will be blocked for them. Then from a user's perspective, now it was the case in primary, secondary education. They couldn't study in public schools. And now there were attempts to ban it also from university. Also, it poses a whole constitutional challenge because these are adults. They're supposed to know what they want and how they want it. But the problem is not only like the formal space in which they are banned from accessing these roles, is the extension, the informal extension of this space. Because now a restaurant owner who thinks he can like position himself as a law enforcer can say, hey, I live by the same rules as the public school.
They can do
that. So
you
cannot access. We had like many cases. One of the most important cases in 2016, I remember, like a couple of sisters, they didn't see each other for years. They wanted to go to a restaurant. One of them was expat, one of them was living in France. So they wanted to have like this special moment. They went to the restaurant and the restaurant owner refused to serve them. And he said, hey, see this law? I apply it in my restaurant. And so, alhamdulillah, at the time we won the case, we changed the situation, we were able to help. But these type of incidents, they are not marginal. They are like central to the experience of these women. Now, some companies since 2016 have the right to apply these standards to their own staff, not to the customers, but to their own staff. They can say, hey, we live by laïcité as a rule, and our understanding of laïcité is the same as public schools. We don't want any political or religious visibility in our workforce. For this reason, either you take your hijab off or you're fired. Right. So this restricts significantly the opportunities professionally and otherwise for sisters, and this has significantly weakened also the Islamic ecosystem, because like these sisters, when they have no opportunity outside of the community, like these organizations and these associations, they do not have always the resources to provide jobs and opportunity for them. And at the end, Muslims pay the price. These sisters are the first to pay the price. And on the longer term, even the French society pays the price, because we deprive all citizens from these skills that we have paid for, that we have trained, and from all their ideas and contribution. So we weaken society as a whole because we cannot get past this notion of racism that is so focused on Muslim women in France.
You've mentioned you referenced the laïcité, secularism, I suppose. Like, what is the French version of secularism? How does that differ to, say, British or American secularism?
Yeah, so there has been like this idea that like it's complicated, you guys cannot understand. We have like the French model, and you from outside are judging us because you cannot make sense of how sophisticated and elegant and structured we are.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's not that complicated. In 1905, the French Parliamentary Assembly passed a law that is like the law of laïcité, and that was saying that the state should be independent from the cults, the churches. At the time, Islam was completely smaller, statistically insignificant in the space, and the target was the bigger influence of the church at the time. So the French parliamentarians wanted to make a clear separation and say that, hey, everybody has the right to practice his or her religion, but the state is independent on this and cannot take a stance, cannot give like specific favor to any one community. In a legal sense, doesn't have to recognize specific religion for them to exist. And it's a matter of like individual and collective organization outside of the public force, outside of the state power in a sense. And this has been recoded in the 80s and then the 90s and now in the present time as a way of targeting Muslim communities. In the 80s, they wouldn't embarrass themselves. The far right would say, hey, you dirty Arabs, go back to your country. You black people, go back to Africa. And they would say it like this. But then like there was a stigma associated with this type of blatantly racist statement. So they found a way to recode this language. And now instead of saying you Arab, go back to your country, they will say we need to reaffirm laïcité quite strictly. And everybody will understand that we're talking about the Arabs and the black people over there. And everybody will understand the target, which is we want to exclude them. We want them to shut up. We want them to be separated from spaces of power and visibility. And this has made racism so acceptable in France, because you have the racism and the objectives of the racism without the guilt or the stigma that comes with it. So laïcité has been the concept that has been weaponized to make racism acceptable and palatable in France, which is why there is such a widespread use of the concept. But when you look just at occurrences, 78 to 82% of these occurrences are in relation to Muslims and Islam. Right. So it's not about secularism, it's about Muslims, really.
Yeah, and how much of this is really related to French colonial experiences, especially in Algeria?
Yeah, so to give them credit, it has been widely debated, but now we know that French invented Islamophobia as a concept. It was a colonial concept. At the time, colonial administrators were concerned that if we have a disbalanced approach to Muslim communities in North Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa, we would create discrepancies and this will undermine the colonial rule. So they said, hey, we shouldn't have Islamophobia, in a sense, by discriminating and disparaging Muslim communities, but we shouldn't have either Islamophilia, and all of this for the greater colonial good in a sense. So the relationship that France has with Muslims is deeply rooted in this colonial history. It's deeply rooted for demographic reason. We said that 80% of them are coming from former colonies. Second, it's deeply rooted in the security doctrine of how you deal with these communities, because it was always about controlling the Muslims. Controlling has two senses in French. It has the notion that you need to steer, you need to exert influence about the way they behave, and you also need to control in sense of accessing information, surveillance over them. And the moment they step away from this control, they will be flagged, targeted, and criminalized. So there is something deeply rooted in colonial history, but there is also something like plainly and explicitly tactical and utilitarian and cynical in the way that racism essentially is also about power. It's also about who has access to opportunities and who controls things in a country. So from an elite perspective, it's not so much ideological as it is practical and pragmatic, in a way that I want to keep the job pool safer for my group. I want to keep the public space in the media and in the political game safer for people who look more like me, ethnically, culturally, politically, or ideologically.
But is it also to do with the rise of far-right opinion that has germinated in the French populace?
Yeah, there is what in economics we call a co-integration mechanism between the two,
right.
i.e. the public discourse and what gets displayed in the media and in the political sphere produces effects in the country. This constructs the ideological framing of the general population. If they look at TV and they see that Muslims are a problem, Muslims are a problem, Muslims are a problem, this belief and this notion would gain traction in society. So the next time they see a Muslim, a random Muslim doing something, their framing is already accusatory and their behavior is going to be influenced by this. So there is an increase in stereotypes and racism in society, and this feeds into what journalists will cover, politicians will say to remain relevant. So mainstream parties have used this to gain political relevance on the short term by adopting the far-right agenda. The far-right's central position in the French political game is not a result of how smart they are, of how widely spread their ideology is in France as a core foundation, is a performance result of French media and French political elites who validated every single racist trope of the far right by making it acceptable, by recoding it linguistically and making it normally and morally acceptable in the French space to say, hey, immigration is an issue, which means that Afghani, Syrians, Indo-Pakistani, Arabs, Sub-Saharan African are an issue. Laïcité is a central value that we need to protect, which means that it is in danger. Who puts it in danger except the one visible religious minority that is the highlight of the media day? And so by recoding this concept and validating them, they have strengthened the far right to an unprecedented level, and we're now at the stage where they define the political rules of the country, and only a small left political minority is fighting against this, because the rest of the spectrum has already accepted this new reality.
Marwan, I often speak to people in America and Britain or elsewhere who say, well, why can't the Muslims then just establish their own institutions and develop their power and their strength? Power meaning their sort of, maybe the word power is the wrong word to use, but their strength through those institutions. What's wrong with Muslims, taking the initiative, I'm told, and building mosques and building community organizations and human rights groups so that we can take the fight to them and make it very clear that we're here to stay and we're not a problem for French society, but we want our rights.
Yeah, they do. I never spoke from a place of despair or disappointment or like distress about like what Muslims in France are like. As I said, like this is one of the most diverse, most potent, most efficient community I've seen in the whole world.
Yeah.
And some of the divides that you find in other communities like are almost inexistent in France within the Muslim community.
Really?
They achieve outstanding success. They do it at the individual level. They also do it at the collective level. Imagine a group that is at the complete bottom of the social ladder, that is given zero opportunity, that is excluded, controlled 8 times a day by the police, excluded and denied any opportunity for funding or recognition, and they still manage to do it. The generation of our parents and our grandparents, they had nothing, not even the language, and they were able to put a roof on our head, to build masajids, halal butchers, restaurants. They had no social capital, and they were able to do this. So they were extremely courageous and resilient and hardworking. Second generation said, hey, now we have the hardware, let's build the software. Let's build schools. Let's build community centers. We don't only need the musalla, but we need like proper architectural messages that are part of the architectural landscape of our country, because they situated themselves in between and a kind of a bridge between the country of their parents and France. And they did this in many different areas. So they are extremely successful, and they are highly organized when given the opportunity and when they take it on themselves to do it. And it's because of this success, and because they never saw themselves as us versus them, that they were perceived as a danger. Because after they'd done this, what did Muslims do exactly in France? They say, hey, like, we're okay, but like elderly people are struggling here, and poor people are struggling there, and this minority is affected here, so we're going to support them. Which means that French Muslims were always part of the leadership groups in advancing support and cohesive initiative for other communities. When this started to touch about power and visibility, that's where like the hardcore systemic Islamophobia became like a tactics and core strategy of the government.
Yeah.
So I would push back on the notion that they are not involved and not capable.
Yeah.
It's just that now, because we've seen they're capable, and because some groups construct Muslims as an us versus them type of dynamic, they are a target, and they are a target with the full force of the state and the full force of the leading racist parties in the political game, which means that a number of media have direct instruction from their owners to produce anti-Muslim rhetoric all day long. You do Muslim stuff all day. That's a direct instruction to them, which produces the effects that we've described. Now Muslim organizations are at the stage where some of them say, hey, we're going to leave like the public space. Like there's no point taking part in this nonsensical debate. Let's build our infrastructure. We do it calmly in a very transparent way, but we are going to build capacity for our masajids, our schools. Let them speak. This president is going to change. This government is going to change. But what will remain is that a whole generation is able to manage the finance of a mosque, secure the mosque, build associations and different infrastructures that are going to last. Let's keep our hands open and our arms open to the other communities and build this dialogue. And let's not get carried away by this noise. And at the individual level, some of them get involved in economics. They build extremely successful businesses, and they give back to communities. They contribute through donations, through volunteering, through funding other initiatives. They just change the approach to say, hey, we're not going to be in the passenger seat of someone else's political game. We are not in a state where we can organize to have like a strong influence in election, even if we don't only care about like Muslim issues, but the welfare and the well-being of all the population. Let's focus on where we can have an impact right now.
In Britain, for example, we established a Muslim vote to try to aggregate, bring together Muslims under one bloc so that we could be effective in general elections. You know, we built institutions that protect civil liberties with and some may claim, well, why can't the French do the same? I understand there are structural barriers to organizing like that.
Yes. So there are like 3 barriers, one of which we are fully responsible. So the one that comes to mind immediately is that we do not always have granular data to see where Muslims could be like either a kingmaker or a key contributor in the elections. There is no ethnic or religious statistics in France, except apparently to construct Muslims as a problem. So we don't see colors, we don't see religions, except when we want to control them and target them. Second issue is that you will face like immediate backlash. Most Muslims, if not all Muslims, when you ask them political questions, apart from Islamophobia, all the other questions, they are like for the common good. So school, healthcare, social justice, and alleviation of poverty across the world, and like basic human rights, like don't kill the Palestinians, don't genocide the whole population, don't bomb a country for no valid reason, don't do any of that. So these are like common sense type of questions. But still, if they get involved as Muslims in the political game, they will be instantly targeted. See, this is political Islam. This is what we told you about. Well, we're not political Islam, but we're Muslims involved politically as citizens, like any other citizens. It just so happens that part of the motivation that pushes us to do good, that pushes us to care about even the ones that we are not related to, is also our faith and our conception of justice. That you would conceive of this as a problem is actually the problem. And the third reason is on our shoulders, is that we still either are not politically involved or we are romantically involved. In the sense that when we look at politics, we don't look at it as a game of strategy and advancement of common good in rational terms. So these are the games, these are the rules. We didn't make the rules, but we can play with it. And so let's be pragmatic and get a result. Voting for a candidate or voting against a candidate is not getting married or getting divorced. There's nothing romantic there. And even when they say something, like this is not a religious speech that like about truth and morality. This is just what they say to get elected. So the notion of betrayal, like we trusted you, we voted for you, we loved, we gave you our love, and you betrayed us. This is a romantic notion of politics that has been for a long time quite prevalent in some parts of the Muslim community in France. This is on us. And the low turnout for elections when there is a decent candidate, this is on us too. This has been used against us time and time and time again. There were, and there still are, some decent politicians, people who dedicate their career for the common good. When they are there, sometimes they are not so attractive in the media, they tend not to speak so well, and so we discard them based on that, when we should be paying attention.
I mean, are you referencing people like Jean-Luc Mélenchon from LFI? I mean, how much are they ready to tackle some of the endemic Islamophobia that exists in France?
I think like Jean-Luc Mélenchon and other leaders in his party, it took them some time, but they came around. They came to a realization that Islamophobia is so structural that it defines part of the French political game. They didn't used to be like that. They used to be on a more secular stance, but then they saw the reality. And for speaking up on police violence, on racism, and on Islamophobia, and on Palestine, they started to be insulted. They started to be demonized. Some of them assaulted in the street. Some of them spit at. Some of them targeted by state-level campaigns. And they came to a second realization that, hey, like, if we're going through this just for saying that there is Islamophobia, just for standing up for Palestinian rights, then what does it tell us about what our Muslim fellow citizens have been going through for generations now? And so they stood firm on this. I don't want to write them a blank check, but I would say that in the past 5 to 10 years, there has been a generation of politicians, many of them with La France Insoumise, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party, that stood up firm for these 3 or 4 questions that are, I would say, the key markers in what makes you acceptable or what makes you an enemy of the Republic, no Star Wars pun intended, in the eye of the French elite.
I've heard recently that an imam or a few imams were suspended from their work as imams, and 1 or 2 have been removed from the country for pretty innocuous sermons that they gave. Like, can you explain what happened there?
Some imams will be targeted for what they say. Some of them will be targeted for who they are. Some of them will be targeted for the masjid that they were working for, but they are not the actual target of the ban or the exclusion or like them being sent away. The main target is the everyday mainstream Muslim who is being told, the moment you speak, this is going to happen to you. And this creates a situation where, like in engineering terms, racism and Islamophobia in France and elsewhere are a stable equilibrium. A stable equilibrium means like it takes a lot to change. To compare in contrast with the position of a pro-Palestinian activist or just a normal human being standing up for justice, it takes just one tweet for an academic or for a doctor to be expelled or fired just for saying, hey, there's a genocide going on in Palestine. So it takes just something for a Muslim comedian or for a non-Muslim doctor or anybody who speaks up against injustice. But it takes a huge effort to change a situation of racism, and even ministers and presidents can say and do the worst thing, they will not budge. It will not change unless you mobilize like large swathes of society. So these imams, they were targeted, some of them for saying something on the minbar or quoting a verse. Now there is like even the use of verses from the Quran in the literal and political sense of it. There will be targeted if they say something about Palestine or something outside of the plain explicit liturgic part of the faith, which is ibadat type of salat and dua. If they say something outside of this realm, they will be targeted. They are the formal target, but the main target is the population at large, telling them, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, the day you dare speak on these issues, this is what is going to happen to you.
So then, Marwan, at the very beginning of today's conversation, I raised the uncomfortable question that isn't it time maybe for Muslims, if they have the means, the 6 million Muslims, subhanAllah, if they have the means to leave this country, because it seems like, you know, just the basic practice of Muslim life in France has now become extremely difficult, extrememely challenging. I mean, where do you stand on this question of Hijrah?
Yeah, so I used to look at the data of people who leave like 1 year after another. It used to vary a bit. Like there was a bit of, people would say there is a bit of randomness in there.
Yeah.
But as you said, I'm a Muslim statistician. I do not believe in randomness. Yeah. And I've seen these numbers grow over year after year.
Really?
And this becomes now a real option for many Muslims. In the early 2000s, these trips back home in Morocco, Algeria, Turkey, or elsewhere, they were, I would say, respectfully uninformed. Like they had this idea that we're going to go back and we have the money from France, so we're going to be rich and it's going to be fine. And then they realized that it was not so easy to live in Egypt or in Turkey or in Algeria or in Morocco. There are other challenges. And they were behaving, for some of them, like expats, and like they feel like so when they came to the realization that there was some hardship and it was different, they change their opinion. But now the waves of people who are actually leaving, first, they don't only leave for these countries. Some of them leave for the UK, some of them leave for the Middle East, some of them for North America, some of them for Asia, and some of them back to their country of origin. But they leave with a much more mature vision and understanding of what it's like, and their level of integration and connection with the country where they settle is much higher. My stance on this is fairly pragmatic. If you have like good reasons of leaving and you have like a good plan, like, it's all fine. It's like we're not tied to any specific place in the world. Like where you live in good conditions and you're able to do good for you and your family and the people around you, that's all fine. If you stay and you're able to get involved, contribute positively to the French society, protect your faith, protect your integrity, do not lose your mind, and still educate a generation of Muslims that are not going to be bitter, but that are not going to be weak either, then go for it. Stay there. I'm pragmatic in the sense that if you leave and you have a proper plan, all fine. If you stay and you have a proper plan, all fine. But be conscious that what is going on in France is not neutral and is not for the weak mind, because it's quite oppressive. And I always have this image, like when people ask me, oh, you travel a lot, where would you settle if this was a place? I say, hey, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fair, which means that we're going to be tested wherever we are. But the test will tend to be different. So if you are in a country where you have all the freedoms and like as a Muslim you are entirely respected, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge you for how punctual you are for salah and how is the quality of your khushu' during salah. And that will be a hard test. But then you have like countries like France where just sticking to your 5 salawat is already a huge deal. Where staying fair and having like kind of always a constructive approach, even in a time of oppression, is already a huge jihad. Where educating Muslim kids with the notion that they should never be like angry and like never be used or never be weakened in their faith and their pride of being Muslim, no matter what happens in the country, is a huge challenge. Is a challenge of every parent right now in France. So I tend to have like what I think hopefully is a balanced approach, but I'm seeing now tens of thousands of families leaving France specifically for this motive.
Really?
And not only Muslims, non-Muslims alike say, hey, like, what's the point? Like, this is going sideways. Now the far right is the leading force. And those who used to be like the reasonable guys, they couldn't care less. And the last 2 or 3 years with the genocide in Gaza have shown that they don't even believe in human rights, in the rule of law, in international fundamental principles. They don't believe in that. So now if it's a matter of like, hey, the strongest will always win, like, let's not invest our resources, our time, our hopes, our energy in a country where it's not worth anymore. So many of them have this discourse now. And some others, they will say, hey, we're fit for struggle. We're fit for adverse conditions. We will stick with it and we'll do the best we can with the conditions that we have.
I mean, we haven't yet talked about the rise of the far right. Until now, the French political system, the way that the electoral system works, is that the far right have always been excluded when it comes to the final round of the presidential election. But there are commentators who now suggest that potentially Marine Le Pen's party, I know she can't stand, but her replacement, Marine Le Pen's party, may indeed win the presidential election. I mean, what is that a realistic prospect? And what does France then look like? I mean, the way you describe France at the moment seems like a state that is under a far-right government. I mean, what would it look like under a real far-right government?
Yeah, so in previous elections, they've defeated the far-right candidate. They didn't defeat the far-right party, and they certainly did not defeat the far-right ideology. They have recoded it and implemented it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even the harshest far-right activist wouldn't dream of having the level of ideological and political control the current French government has over ethnic or religious minorities. So they've succeeded in their plan. Now, if the far-right comes into office, they will be even more unhinged. So it's not true to say, hey, like it's already the worst, like the far right cannot
Get
do.
worse.
Well, they can do more damage. Look at Trump and the whole analysis that, hey, they were already so far off on the right. Maybe we're going to do the round and come back on the left. It's not like that. They can do even worse than that. And the only way some presidents and prime ministers, the likes of Macron, seem reasonable is when you put them in comparison with Donald Trump or even with the far right. But it's never a good political proposition where the only value you have to show is that I'm the least of two evils. It's never a good plan. It's never a good political program. So we are set for an election where the far right is still going to be extremely strong in the center. And by the center, I mean from the Parti Socialiste, which is the equivalent of the UK's Labour or the Democrats in the US. From this part of the spectrum up to central right, they will be competing. There will be like many candidates. One of them will maybe emerge a bit there. And then the third block is going to be the left, the actual left, with Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who already announced that he wants to run for the election. It's going to be a turnout game because Jean-Luc Mélenchon's ideas have the most traction from a programmatic platform perspective with the general population, but his voters and his supporters do not turn out well during the election. But the far right, you can be certain that they will turn out because they vote against. They vote against us. They vote against the poor people. They vote against people who are like of a diverse background. They vote against anything that doesn't suit their core ideology.
Yeah,
that's the next presidential election for you.
Well, Marwan, you've traveled across Europe. I mean, do you feel that that French model is unique and peculiar just to France? Or should we be ready to see this type of French Islamophobia rolled out across Europe and maybe even to North America?
You had a change of strategy for the French over the past 10 years. They used to be in a stance where like they are outside of the rest of the communities and say, hey, you guys do not understand us. You do not understand French secularism. You don't understand the French model. And now they say we need to change stance and invest much more in lobbying for our ideology and our strategy. So now they are much more invested in international bodies. They dare even challenge UN representative on human rights. You've seen it with Francesca Albanese. They do the same for other representatives. Whether it be at the EU Commission level, whether it be at the OECD, at the OSCE, or at UNESCO, whenever like they see someone who is going to speak against their interest, and their interest being like criticizing France, even for a very valid reason, they will target them. They've tried to promote their model by inducing a Europe-wide framework to address Islamism and radicalism, separatism, entrism, Shumianism, whateverism. They failed to do that. So now they have like bilateral tactics. So they go with Austria on some of the votes and they push for this agenda. And they try to do this with Belgium. They failed. They've tried to do it with other countries. They failed. But France on the international scene is still seen as like a reasonable country in this respect. So for the uneducated eye, academically and politically, some of these concepts, they make their way. So for instance, Sweden has created an anti-radicalization agency that is very much influenced by the French model. And because they do not get past like shallow type of analysis, like it works. And because conspiracy theories like anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or the fact that Muslims are taking over, are replacing, this is like so easy to build and spread, much more difficult to counter, because for you to counter them effectively, you need to be in a rational debate that is fact-based. You bring on like the key data, the key facts, the historical evidence, and so on. Most of the time, you don't have that luxury. You don't even have like 30 seconds to make a point. So these conspirational theories are making their way throughout Europe in many countries that take on the French model in one way or another. And many Muslim communities, Jalal, around the world, they do not realize this, and they do not realize how close it is to them. Because these diplomats that are often used, or like these pundits that are often used now by some of the groups in France, they are like making their way to promote this ideology elsewhere and not only defend their stance at the national level.
One final question for you, Marwan. I mean, it's been really fascinating today and sobering, actually, in many ways, the way you talk about France. But I've got a question really about your trade. You're a Muslim statistician. You're a statistician by trade, and numbers mean a lot to you. And I've become well aware in the last general election in the UK, I realised that in Britain we just didn't have control over the numbers. We didn't really know where our demographics were, who was who. We didn't have the granular data, and we set about trying to do that. I think numbers are extremely important for us as communities across the West. Like, can you, from your vantage point, to stress why you think we need to be far more on top of our numbers when it comes to Muslim communities that are minorities?
Yeah. So my starting point is as follows. The current state of the Ummah is such that we celebrate more ceasefires than victories. It's true in any setup. It's true in economics. It's true for social justice. It's true in the face of different genocides and attacks and other forms of oppression. Yeah. And there is a huge asymmetry. And it's not only specific to Muslims. People on the good side, there is this asymmetry. You want to address climate change and the dangers that come with it. You want to address poverty. You want to address social forms of oppression. You will be on the weaker side from a resource perspective, which means that you need to be extremely careful, thoughtful, and precise with your use of resources. So you cannot play a guess games where you are going to try this. You need to know what to do and how to do it. For you to be able to do this, you need to understand like the causal mechanism. You need to be able to analyze, and the data allows you to do this. So if you have the numbers and the different variables you're looking at demographics before the election, you're looking at results after the election, and you are able to analyze one with the other as a cause or as a factor in the rise or a change of a political outcome. This is true for elections. This is true for any question that we actually care about. So when you think like a statistician, you approach the electoral and the political game from a place of knowledge rather than a place of randomness and a place of emotions or a place of romanticism. When you think like a statistician and you lead a masjid, you know that you know your community. You know that like in your mosque in central New York, there is a high turnover during Salat al-Jumu'ah. So there are a lot of tourists, a lot of taxi, a lot of local workers too, but there is a high turnover. So it's good for information and dissemination because these people are going to travel and spread this information. But if you are in East London, you have like a high stability for Salat al-Fajr. You know that the people who come for Salat al-Fajr, these are like the masjid goers, the local families. So if you want to build your community, you work with them. If you want to spread a message about education and influence the youth, you work with them. If you know that you are working in a community that is in Canary Wharf or in La Défense in France or in the financial district, you will have highly affluent people who want to contribute financially or professionally or otherwise. So if you know that like your local community is 70% affluent, 20% are struggling a bit, you know who to connect with who to design social initiatives. If you know that like they are extremely diverse in their religious opinions, in their cultural and ethnic background, you know that like your choice of imam has to be influenced by this so that he's able to provide content and educate and be credible to everyone. So a lot of the challenges that Muslims face when I speak to imams, community leaders, academics, journalists, or local families, and when I think of them as a problem to solve, as an engineer or as a statistician, I always come up with a few ideas that could easily be addressed, because what we list as notions of like divisions among Muslim communities, lack of capacity, lack of organization, honestly, these problems are ABC of what we usually do at work. And many Muslims are in the consulting sector, in the tech sector, in the engineering sector, in the industry, in the food sector. The problems we have to solve for ourselves within our ummah, most of the time are much simpler than the ones we have to solve at work. Let's use a bit of this knowledge to solve issues that we care mostly about, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Marwan Muhammad. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. Now you've reached the end of this show, and the fact that you've stayed until the very end tells me that you truly believe in our work. Please consider making a one-off donation or becoming a member by visiting thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Now your contributions give you exclusive behind-the-scenes access and the ability to ask questions to our guests, and monthly calls with myself, my team, and our guests like Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair, and keep us in your du'as.